my first course. I'm new at this, so I'm going to have to figure out things as I go along rather than not do it. So I want to talk about abortion beginnings. I will be doing another course later about the actual abortion, and then another course at another time about aftercare. So how does abortion start for girls? Let's talk about that. I don't believe it's a quick overnight decision. I believe there are a lot of things that come into play, a lot, more than we probably know. So as I'm walking to work, I'm going to talk about this. Basically, I know for me, and I say this respectfully, my parents were really poor. They really were. And my dad grew up on a farm, and I remember him telling stories. I don't know how much of it was true. I only heard a few stories, but he said that they were lucky if they had a pair of shoes, and not a pair that fits you, but just a pair. So that kind of stuck with me. I don't think my father always meant to not give me much attention and time, but he had a lot to deal with. And back then too, I don't think a lot of men really understood how to deal with daughters. So I think that's kind of part of it. I'm just going to put my coat on better here. So my father was from the country, pretty naive. He had an uncle. I had an uncle who died of diabetes when I was younger, and that was pretty traumatic for him. I remember going to the hospital and seeing Donnie, and I was told to give him a hug, and I remember him smiling, and he just loved us so much. But and that was it, the end. Nobody talked about it again. I don't know, there was a real lack of communication in my family. You just didn't talk about things. I think that's another part. Donnie, I had heard, worked at this China Dragon place in Hooksett, New Hampshire. I get the feeling it wasn't the best place to work. So I remember as a kid seeing that place. My mother pointed it out, and then that place wasn't around any longer. It got burned down or something. So my father also had basically rebelled against his mother by marrying my mother. He met my mother at a party, and that's how I came along. I believe she got pregnant with me. I don't know if it was on purpose and she tricked him or what, but he married her because he felt probably that it was the right thing to do back then. I don't know the whole story. Then my mother, she came from the projects, and she had a lot to deal with. My parents were just really preoccupied. My mother, I don't believe, had the ability to know how to mother. And I say that respectfully. She had a mother who was really rotten to her. Raging alcoholic. Had her marriage annulled, sleeping around with a lot of men. So not only did she have her boyfriends, but she had the big bands over, and a lot of black men, etc., would hit on my mother. So my mother, being the oldest, had to take care of her younger siblings, 9 of them, with hardly any food over at Rockwomen Projects in Manchester, New Hampshire. Now, as we understand abortion, we really need to look at people's backstories in order to get a better idea of a situation. I was thinking the Bible about when there's sin. The blind man asks Jesus, whose fault is this? Is it mine? You know, people ask, is it his fault? Did he sin? Or did his parents sin? And I love that because Jesus says neither. It was for God's glory. And sometimes we do have things that happen that are beyond our control, and it's just the way it is. So from there, you know, my mother, I believe, had a lot to deal with her mother growing up. She didn't have a toothbrush. She had a lot of gum surgery later on because my grandmother spent the money on alcohol instead of providing whatever little money she did have. Confronting my grandmother later, she said she needed to keep her sanity, and things happen. I think there is some truth in that somewhere. She did say, what good would it have been if I was taken away to a mental institute and then they didn't have anyone, which is true. So I think my grandmother definitely could do better, but that's where she was at. My grandfather worked 3 jobs to try to make, to try to put food on the table. And so my uncles didn't really have a father around, and my mother didn't really have much going for her with parents. My grandfather would take them to McDonald's on the weekends, Sunday or something, his only day off, and that was a special time. And I do know once my mother broke her leg on a skateboard, and it was my grandfather who came over to help her because she couldn't even get up, she couldn't walk. So everyone seemed to admire my grandfather. Everyone knew my grandfather, but not so much for my grandmother. I'm not saying that's fair. My grandmother also needed her husband around, which she told me he would go out for coffee, etc. So there was a lot there, and I'm not going to pretend to know what happened. Later on, when they had their marriage annulled, it was kind of strange seeing my grandmother's boyfriend and grandfather's girlfriend. So without a lot of parenting skills from either side of my parents, it's not hard to imagine that the standards coming from the projects are going to be pretty low. So that's where my first part 1 comes in here. I'm going on close to 10 minutes here, and that's where I'm going to stop for now.